Hey everyone, it's Chapman Hamburg. We're going to start our Georgia O'Keeffe painting project. Before we begin, we're going to go over some of the materials that we'll be using today. So for materials, we're going to want a canvas or paper, some sort of surface to work on. I'm just working on a watercolor paper today. You're also going to want a palette, either a wooden or glass palette, or what I'm using today is just simple palette paper. So I got a couple of those sheets put out, and then you're gonna want some brushes, like a couple different sizes, small, medium, big, maybe one that's a bit smaller for detail. And then in terms of the paints, I'm working in acrylic. You can follow along working in watercolor or really any paint. And these are the colors I'm gonna set my palette with: white, lemon yellow, cadmium yellow. This is cadmium red hue, which ends up looking kind of orange. Burnt sienna, alizarin crimson, phthalo blue, ivory black. Just in case you're curious, but you can really just follow along with any colors you want. You're going to want a palette knife, if you have one, to mix colors. If not, you can just use your brush to mix different colors. You're going to want a cup of water, and then also some sort of spray thing can be helpful to kind of keep your palette wet so it doesn't dry, if you're working in acrylic at least. And then paper towel, and also we're going to start off with a pencil. So that's the materials you'll be wanting. Alright, so let's get started. I'm going to start with blocking in the drawing with my pencil, and then we'll paint on top of our drawing. So right in the center we have this skull, and I'm going to block in where the top is going to be and how far down the bottom is going to go. And just kind of figuring out where it's going to be placed. Now I'm going to get this simplified shape. So you can kind of think of it as like an oval shape here. So I'm kind of just placing an oval. And now I'm going to draw two straight lines on either side coming down. And you can put a center line in the middle, and that helps you get it symmetrical. So this is like the big shape of my skull, or of the skull. Now before moving on, I'm gonna block in the antlers. So right about here and here, there's gonna be this nice C curve coming up, and then it's gonna wrap back around like that. And then there's going to be another C curve coming up to the very top of the canvas. And then I'm going to darken my lines a bit so that you can see more clearly. In your drawing, you're going to want to keep it pretty light. That way, if you make any mistakes, it's easy to erase, and then when you start the painting, it's not too dark. If you push too hard, you can damage the paper, like indent it. And notice actually how I'm holding my pencil. Since I'm blocking things in, I'm holding my pencil like this rather than like this. This is more for precise detail. If I'm trying to block things in loosely, I try to hold it like this, and then I can kind of use my whole wrist, especially when you're working at like an easel like this. Okay, and then there's going to be another horn coming up here, and of course my drawing doesn't have to be perfect, just trying to get a simplified block in of the shape so I know where I'm trying to place everything. So the base kind of comes down, and then this comes up there, and then there's going to be another base over here. So once again, a C curve, and it's coming over, and it's not perfectly symmetrical. The shape is a little different, and I think that's interesting. Not perfect. Most humans' faces are not perfectly symmetrical either. And then here's this C curve coming up and almost reaching the top, but not quite. So sometimes my drawings get a little messy, and then I like to clean it up a little bit just so it's kind of clear which lines I'm using to represent the edge. And start with that loose block in, and then start to kind of make things a bit more clear and specific once I become more confident with my shapes. Okay, now before continuing with the skull, I'm going to continue to block in the rest of the picture. So just below the skull, there's some flowers. I'm not going to draw every little petal. I'm just going to kind of suggest this bottom flower. Then there's a couple more smaller flowers. And then there's this one that comes up, like over here, looking like a daisy. I'll draw that a little darker so you guys can see clearer. So here's like an oval shape for the center of the flower, and then the petals are kind of coming out in different directions, just kind of placing them where you don't want each one to come out like you don't want each petal to look the exact same. You want each one to kind of have its own little character, and that way there's more variety, because in nature there's just a vast amount of variety, and we have a tendency to make everything look the same. So you want to try to fight against that. Alright, so there's kind of those little flowers blocked in. Now down here on the bottom, there's these beautiful mountains, these orange mountains these are what really captivated O'Keeffe when she traveled to New Mexico, and she just kept visiting back and there until she moved there. And she just loved the shapes of the mountains and the open space and the colors. She felt so inspired by it, and like it was her spot. And she had this idea that if she prayed to God. So there's these simple shapes. I'm just once again trying to find variety within the hills so that they don't all look the same. And then there's these lines, and of course I'll add more information to them as I paint them. And then there's these cool cloud shapes. I'm just gonna kind of loose these sketchers, like this C curve here, and then some clouds down here, and then there's some little clouds along here, and then like a little blue patch that comes down here and here. So something like that. Now I'm gonna go back to my skull in the middle and start to add more to that. So we have the bases of the antlers, and then gonna erase that. Try to make sense of it. And then right below the antlers comes this C curve here. This is like the eye socket. And then there's going to be this darker part for the eye. And I'm putting a little bit of shading just to help me see what's going on. And then same thing on the other side. It's gonna come out, and then I kind of want it to line up, so I can draw like a line here to help me line this up. And there's gonna be another eye socket. Okay, and then there's gonna be, it's gonna come in a little bit thinner than I had it. And I can erase this line now. And then along the center line, there's gonna be the nasal bone. Right by the eyes, you can see the tops of them, these two different planes, just like us humans have. These are just very elongated. And then we're gonna have the nasal cavity here. And then there's gonna be this bone coming in from there. And then this is gonna be much thinner than I originally drew, so I'm seeing how I can make adjustments to improve my drawing. All right, so that'll do. I can erase my center line and my different lines that help me get there. There's a little bit more information, but this is just good enough to get me going with my painting, and then I'll get started with the painting. Alright, I'm gonna get started with the painting, and I'm gonna mix a background color where it's kind of that slightly grayish color, so I got mostly white with a little bit of black. And I'm just mixing with my palette knife. You totally can just mix it with your brush as well, like getting some white and then some black if you don't have a palette knife. And then I'm gonna get some water to really thin it out because this is the background. And I'm just gonna kind of lay it over my drawing even, and since it's thinner acrylic, it's gonna cover it. And I'm gonna add a touch of like brown or burnt sienna, some sort of brown color into it to kind of warm it in some areas. Oops, it's a little more warm than I want, but that's okay. I can just get more of that black and white. Put it over. More water. And I'm gonna bring it down to the clouds. And I can still see my drawing underneath it because it's thinned out with the water. If you're working on watercolor paper like I am, you don't want it to get too wet and you don't want to be too rough with the paper, or it can start to come apart. So you want to be a little careful, to be a little delicate with it. Okay, so at least the starting place with the background, I'm actually going to cover up some of those brown patches.